Got 4 minutes.
4
We have
minutes.
4.
Yes.
Anna,
You were in. Sweet.
We've got quorum, right?
you certainly do have quorum.
So you're all aware, we're also now live.
Thank you. So no, before we get going, Harsh has joined us online. Skylar will be joining us online, and Peter will be joining us online as well. I guess he's going to be a little bit later joining, but. Everybody's ready, I see. I'm just waiting on the clock. Won't be fair. We have a bell outside. Let's wait for the bell. Peace. We died. Good morning, everybody. It's now 9:30, so I'll call the meeting to order. I would like to acknowledge that we have some people joining through Zoom. Harj, good to see you. Skylar will be joining us through Zoom as well as Peter. So we do have quorum, so we will start the meeting. I will start with the territorial acknowledgement. We will begin by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is traditional territory of the Adirondwan, Anishinaabe, Haudenosaunee, and Nuiaqpik peoples who have longstanding relationships to the land, water, and region of southwestern Ontario. The local First Nation communities of this area include Chippewa of the First Nations, the United Nations of the Thames, Munsee Delaware Nation, and Delaware Nation of Moraviantown. In the region, there are 11 First Nation communities and a growing Indigenous urban population. We value the significant historical and contemporary contributions of local and regional First Nations and all the original people of Turtle Island. So we'll move on to number 2, which is modifications of the agenda. Tracy, any modifications?
Nothing that we've heard of.
We will now move on to a declaration of pecuniary interest. Are there any declarations from the board members? Seeing none. Item number 4, presentations and delegations. Tracy, would you like to introduce our presenters, please?
Sure. As You may recall when we had our intro session, our training and orientation meeting, many of you heard very brief summary overview presentations from each of our individual units. But today we're allowing a little bit more time, a little bit deeper dive into our programs and services. We're going to start today's presentation off with Jenna Elaine and Stephanie Pratt. And they are going to be talking about the environmental planning and regulations unit. There's lots of changes that have happened in environmental planning and regulation, and we're expecting to continue to happen. So I thought it was worthwhile to have them give their presentation first, but just to highlight over the next few months, we'll be having individual units give their presentations and of course have our tour that is identified later on the agenda as one of our meetings in March to continue from that meeting to have a broader tour, again, highlight on the ground some of those programs and services. Let me close the blinds a little bit. Oh, that's it. Right.
Great. So as Tracy mentioned, if you were at the board orientation session in January, you already heard a little bit about our environmental planning and regulations unit. At that meeting, I also gave a presentation on Bill 23 and some of the legislative changes that have happened recently that have impacted our unit. But really today we wanted to talk about Bill 23 along with some of the other challenges our unit has been facing. And we'll be focusing specifically on our environmental planning and regulations program areas. So we won't be speaking to drinking water source protection. You'll be hearing more about that program area at your next meeting when you'll be convening as a source protection authority. But what we really wanted to focus on was some of the challenges we've been facing over the last few years within our unit and how we've been adapting and making changes to try and address those challenges and some opportunities for where we see ourselves moving forward. To do that, we've undertaken a SWOT analysis, and I'm going to turn it over to Steph, who is our planning coordinator, to walk you through what that is.
So we started off by including a nice sunrise photo of a few of our team members down at Laternal. We chose to do a SWOT analysis today because we really did think it summarized the growth that we've seen in our unit over the last few years and how we can progress moving forward. So we think it's a strong tool to help summarize that information, and we'll get into it now with some of those details. So an overview of what we're going to cover today is highlighted above. So you can see here that we have a number of strengths and opportunities that we've identified, as well as some of our weaknesses and threats. In terms of strength, we've seen a lot of change to our staff capacity and structure. We've seen a lot of growth in the knowledge and comprehension of the staff we have been able to retain. And we're trying to improve our service delivery standards as a result of these growth. In terms of weaknesses, we do have some items we're going to cover off today, which include our mapping resources that we use and our policies that we use to make decisions. In terms of opportunities, we're going to speak to the training that we've undertaken for staff to help ensure that knowledge and comprehension is strong moving forward. We're going to speak to the updates we've made to our filing system for staff to have better resources. And we're going to speak to how we can continue to improve on our service delivery where we can see those opportunities for more growth. The last category is threats. So a lot of policy changes, as Jenna alluded to, and through the previous presentations that she's provided. So we're going to cover off another summary of that information, as well as talk about land availability and violations, and then some budgetary constraints that can impact us moving forward.
So our real strength as a unit is really in our staffing and our team. And historically, our planning and regulations staff have been much smaller in number. And what we've been seeing kind of over the last decade, and particularly in the last few years, is a real change and increase in the amount of growth and development happening across our watershed. And what that means is more permit applications, more planning applications that are getting circulated for our comment and review. And the complexity of those applications are changing, requiring additional technical review and more sort of comprehensive review and comment. So in order to try and address that, we have been trying to beef up our staff and increase our capacity. And we've made some structural changes as well, kind of for twofold. One, because we were finding a lot of applicants that have been applying to positions within our unit have had a great education, but not necessarily a lot of work experience, actual on-the-job experience. So we wanted to create some more junior level positions for sort of younger staff with less work experience that can come into and grow within our unit and provide opportunities for growth upwards within our unit itself. But also the organization as a whole has experienced a fair amount of turnover in staff, particularly in the last few years, a lot of retirements. We've seen that happening in our unit as well, a fair amount of turnover. And we didn't have a ton of overlap in terms of roles and responsibilities within our unit previously. And it's created some, I don't want to say chaos, but just some challenges when staff leave. It leaves a big hole. So what we've tried to do with our structure is to add a little bit of overlap. So if someone leaves down the road, we've got coverage and knowledgeable staff that can kind of slip into those roles and provide that overlap and coverage until we can fill vacancies. So if you look at our planning stream, you can see that we've created some junior positions that's our planner 1 position, for which we have 2. We have our more senior planners in planner 2 roles. And then we've created Steph's position, which is our planning coordinator position, who Steph handles some of our more challenging planning files and oversees our entire planning team. We've tried to kind of duplicate that within our regulations team as well, creating our regulations assistant role. So they still issue permits, but more kind of our minor and routine permits, and they support our regulations officers, for which we have 4. And then we've created a regulations coordinator position as well, which will kind of mirror the planning coordinator position, again, handling some of those more complex permit files. And acting as a support and overseeing the rest of our regulations team. In terms of our technical support staff, we currently have an environmental engineer, a hydrogeologist, and we added a full-time ecologist from a part-time ecologist position this past year. We also added a resource specialist. I'll speak to that more in a later slide. And we've kind of slipped Deb in to this category. She's our administrative assistant and provides administrative support across the unit to all of our program areas. And then we've got our source protection team, which has remained unchanged for some time. So our other strength has been in our service delivery. With that additional capacity, we've been able to see improvements in our service delivery, particularly over the last year. And we talked about this at our AGM last month, so I won't go into too much, but we have two sets of guidelines that speak to our timelines for permitting. Ones that were set in 2010 by the province, and then some additional standards for improved service delivery that Conservation Ontario developed in 2019. So you'll see the number of permits increase significantly from 2022 over 2021, and you'll see we've made some real improvements in terms of meeting. And those are those Conservation Ontario, those faster timelines that are recommended by Conservation Ontario. We met those timelines 86% of the time last year compared to 76% in 2021.
Contrary to how regulations is driven, planning is driven by the Planning Act. So all the timelines are set out very clearly in the act based on the type of application. So our municipalities, when they get that timeline or that application, they deem it complete. We work within the municipal timelines to drive when their council meetings are held or different committee meetings, and how we work through that process is driven largely by our municipalities. We strive to always meet the timelines there as well. However, we don't have as stringent reporting So we don't have those same target numbers that we're trying to reach every year. That's something that the province is coming out and requesting that that be tracked better. And with some of the different changes in the bills, they're asking that refunds be initiated through the municipal process, and better tracking of the types of applications, the number of housing units that are going in, and all the different development levels that are going in with that. So we don't have any specific planning numbers on how we're reaching those targets, but we do strive to ensure that every application that goes before council does have our comments provided on it as well. So you can see based on the numbers for planning, we have seen a large amount of growth over the last few years, and that's been able to be helped supported by the amount of staff that we've increased. So we'll move on to the two weaknesses that we identified now. And the first of those is our mapping. Mapping is our tool that we use every day to be able to do our jobs, to be able to communicate with municipalities, landowners, and other stakeholders. As soon as someone calls, the first thing we do is we open up our mapping software. It's something that for our internal staff is a bit more detailed than our front-facing software that's available to the municipality and to landowners through our website. But it's our biggest communication tool that we have. Every application, someone wants to look at the map, they want to gain a better understanding of how the information that we have is affecting their property and their availability to develop it differently in the future. So our two biggest constraints that we are dealing with right now is our flood hazard updates and our erosion hazard updates. A lot of the watershed has been modeled through historic information, but some other areas have not, which is where a generic regulation comes into play. Our modeling staff in our flood unit has been working to undertake modeling across those areas of the watershed to either implement modeling where it wasn't there before, or revise modeling where information is outdated. So we put just a screenshot on the left there, so you can see some of the changes of the new information versus the old. So at the northern extent of the map, you can see that there really hasn't been much change in the flood hazard, but as you move further south, there is a bit of a different change. Some of the information that goes into that will be provided through our public consultation process that we're doing later this year and into 2024. And then it'll also connect with our erosion hazard layer as well. So we're trying to better define where there's a riverine feature, where there's valley lands, and how we're able to apply our policy and review applications that may be affected by these hazards.
So one of the other weaknesses we have identified is in our policies, and that's specifically referring to our environmental planning policy manual, which is guided by our Section 28 regulation. But there's a number of other guiding pieces that kind of inform our policy and decision making. So this is just some background on some of those pieces. There's the provincial policy statement. The latest version is 2020, but we are expecting a new version to come out in the very near future. We also are very much guided by two technical guides that were created by the province. And both are about 20 years old. They were originally published in 2004, and one speaks to flooding and the other speaks to erosion. So those are some guiding pieces. We understand that the updates have been in progress for those, and we are expecting the new versions to be released sometime in the near future as well. In addition to that, we have our county and municipal planning documents. All of the official plans and zoning bylaws contain sections that speak to the natural environment, including hazards. And those documents are updated continuously to meet provincial changes. We provide comment on those documents whenever they're out for public consultation for changes. And we try to remain consistent with our own policies, with our municipal policies. So our policy manual, as you know, was originally approved by the board in 2006. We undertook a minor amendment in 2017. And we've had sort of, since the manual was published in 2006, there's been ongoing discussions about updating the manual. Revisions continue to be kind of postponed. We get new legislation, changes that we have to adapt to, and our current postponement is due to the new Section 28 regulation that we're expecting in the very near future. So where we don't have, the policies in our manual are somewhat broad in some cases and not particularly specific. And in those cases, we have developed some internal best practices or internal guidance that staff have been relying on sort of as interim documents to help guide our decision making and make sure that we're being consistent in terms of the decisions that we're making in advance of our policy manual being updated to kind of reflect those things. And so one of those things is our draft wetland compensation policy, which we're gonna speak to that later in the meeting where we're talking about it. We're bringing you with the bringing forward a position paper, but we do have kind of a draft policy that has been developed by staff but never finalized, and it's sort of something that staff refer to from time to time, but it's not a public document. We've never released it to anyone, and so that's one of the things. In addition to some other things like our draft accessory structures policy, where we have sort of internal guidance or best practices that staff are relying on until we get that policy manual updated. This is me too. Okay, so in terms of opportunities, we feel we've done a good job in terms of developing some guidance materials and getting our newer staff the proper training that they need in order to do their jobs. But it's something we want to continue to build on and improve on. So we've been in the process of preparing a lot of training materials and documents. For a long time, we had the same staff and the same roles for a very long time, and we didn't have a whole lot of training or guidance for new staff because we weren't adding new staff very often. And one of the things that we're finding, particularly now that we've added so many additional staff, is that we want to remain consistent and make sure everyone's applying things consistently. And so that means providing everyone with the same kind of training so that everybody's on the same page. So one of the things we did do was create this resource specialist role, which many of you who have been around for a while will know Karen Winfield. She's currently in that position. She's been one of our regulations officers here at the authority for some time. Karen continues to handle some of our permit files. She's mainly focused where we have on some of the enforcement issues we're having, where we've got violations or challenges that are kind of going through the courts. Karen's handling some of those files while also being a sort of resource with all of her knowledge of the watershed to our planning and regulatory staff. And that some of the things that she's working on are some of those training materials, fact sheets, templates, and documents, guidance pieces for our staff. We've also been trying to get staff more engaged in some professional development. A lot of our staff in our unit attended Laternal in October. Karen's been really great at getting lunch and learns going. She's been bringing kind of internal staff that are our expert presenters, as well as external staff in. Some of our retired staff have come in to give presentations over lunch to our staff, as well as staff have been attending virtual conferences, webinars, and workshops where opportunities have presented themselves. We've also been making some improvements and want to keep building on our templates, as well as the way we track both permits and our planning applications. We've created some updated spreadsheets, and the use of teams in our units has been really beneficial in terms of those tracking some of those numbers has been a lot easier through the use of teams.
With that documentation, I'll just provide a brief overview of how we've improved some of our filing. Previously, most of our applications we received were hard copy paper. They were mailed in, circulated through our front desk into our staff that handled different geographic areas. Since COVID, I think that was the big turnaround, is when people needed to start focusing on electronic circulations or submissions of applications. And I think that was the big turning point for us and most of our municipalities, is how to get that information out and what software to use to do it, and then where you're going to store all of that electronic data. So we have a hard paper copy system, which is in our bunker downstairs, which I'm sure on your tour you will take a look at. But we've tried to mirror that system into an electronic system so that staff can be consistent with how they're trained through our paper copies into our electronic ones. Basically, it will store all of our emails so that through staff transition, nothing gets lost. And it will store all of our documentation in terms of technical reports that might be submitted and may impact future development down the line past the current application that we're dealing with. And will allow better cohesion amongst our unit to find data when staff's on vacation or turnover occurs. With this new system, and as Jenna mentioned, we've used Teams for part of it, and some of it's just through the existing software we have available, but we do see the future integration into a database or other software as a potential opportunity to help continue growing how staff can have access to this information.
So where we see opportunity is to continue to improve on our service delivery. We recognize that service delivery requires continuous improvement. We feel we have a good complement of staff in our planning and regulations program areas, but we'll continue to evaluate and ensure we have the appropriate number of staff to address the workload that we've got. We're currently in the process, we have been trying to increase our technical staff too. So we went last year from a half an ecologist to a full-time ecologist. We're in the process of hiring another engineer. So we're actually doing some interviews this week to support engineering review in our unit. Yeah, I think staff have been good at adjusting to changing timelines in both the planning and permitting program areas by coming up with creative solutions and working really as a team, both internally and externally. So moving on to threats. I guess we see one of our biggest threats as policy changes, so no surprise. Here we've talked about this. I did talk about this a bit at the board orientation, but back kind of ever since the provincial government changed in 2018, we've been experiencing a fair amount of change. The first to come was Bill 108, the More Homes, More Choice Act. That made changes to the CA Act at the time, changing kind of our service, our programs and services, creating those categories of programs and services. There was changes to our board structure, and that was when MZOs or ministerial zoning orders changes were made, requiring CAs to issue permits where a ministerial zoning order has been issued. And then kind of moving forward in 2022, there was Bill 109, which impacted the Planning Act, but certainly has implications for our planning staff. Those changes meant that municipalities are required to issue refunds where they don't meet timelines associated with the Planning Act applications. So there's a real kind of pressure to meet those timelines coming from municipalities, which includes getting our comments in quicker to our municipalities. The implementation for that has been pushed back to July 1st, but a lot of our municipalities, we've been in conversation with them to try and prepare for that and get ready for those changes. And then came in the fall, Bill 23, the More Homes Faster Act. Again, lots of changes to the Conservation Authorities Act. Through that, particularly when it came to natural heritage, which took effect January 1st through Ontario Regulation 596, basically prohibiting conservation authorities from entering Category 2 agreements with our municipalities to provide that natural heritage review that we've been providing for so long for many of our watershed municipalities, most of them. And there's a lot of changes we're still expecting. As I mentioned, there's a new provincial policy statement expected. We're waiting on our new Section 28 regulation. That was a proposal under Bill 23, and we're anticipating the new regulation to come out soon. As I mentioned before, we are waiting on those technical guides too from the province that inform decisions around flooding and erosion hazards. So lots of change. Sorry.
One of the other big threats that we face is land availability and our violations. So with increasing demand for development, we've seen the amount of land available really diminishing. And the land that is left does have a fair number of constraints on it that would hinder the potential to develop the entirety of a parcel. So in those circumstances, we do work very closely with our municipal staff to ensure that the technical reports that may be needed to assess the development potential of a parcel are undertaken appropriately and are scoped with staff, reviewed by both our staff and municipal staff where they have the resources available to do so. And we try to work together to make sure that those resources can be met. In our urban settings, we're seeing a lot of the growth or in a residential standpoint and within our urban growth boundaries, which is a set boundary at the edge of most urban limits that says all growth needs to happen within that limit, which is where we see that amount of land resource being diminished. Outside of that, in our rural areas, the residential development isn't as intense as in the urban centers. With servicing available and different constraints from a municipal perspective, it does have a bit of a different driving force behind the forms of development in rural versus urban. We still do work very closely with all of our rural municipalities as well to make sure that they are meeting their goals for either urban growth or rural development through agricultural practices, commercial and industrial developments as well. We have seen an increased volume in applications, as you noted probably in our earlier slides through those growth numbers. Each year we are seeing more applications. And with that, we are seeing more intense application and complex applications that require further staff review, more detailed, more issues that are arising, and different concerns on how to balance environmental issues with economic development and where should housing go and what should be the limiting factors to where it can go. And with that, we do see an increase in violations as a result of some of those conflicting interests. So with our violations, most of the time it's unauthorized works either through a lack of knowledge of the different policies that may be in place on each parcel or a disagreement that may occur between how the policies are applied to each individual piece of land. So a lot of it happened through COVID is when we saw a big increase. There was a lack of knowledge of how much enforcement we were able to undertake. And then again, with all the policy changes that we've been seeing, there's also been a lack of understanding across our municipal staff and our landowners of who's responsible for what and how is the environment going to be protected as we see these changes come forward. So we do have a few photos just to show some of the major projects we've been working on over the last couple of years. Some of those include wetland disturbances, movement of fill and grading, enclosures of watercourse. You can see here, there's been a large amount of activity across this parcel. Wetland has been removed and there's different areas of ponding water. This parcel had a watercourse enclosed and enclosed, it was just basically filled with dirt, not actually piped, as well as the wetland that was removed associated with the watercourse feature. Here we have some placement of fill and grading activities in relation to a watercourse and a wetland. You see some of the mass amount of dirt that was piled in the elevation change that has happened as a result of some of this activity. Here we have an erosion hazard that's been graded and altered, which may impact the stability of this riverine system. This photo shows the construction of a foundation. Adjacent to what is right just north of this foundation is a watercourse and valley system.
So one of the other threats we've identified is certainly budgetary constraints. So as you know, Bill 23, through Bill 23, there was the implementation of a fee freeze for conservation authorities that took effect January 1st. It's only in effect for a year, but I think it's quite likely that that could be extended beyond the initial 1-year freeze. And then, you know, Bill 108, those changes that were made in 2019 to CA program services has really changed the whole funding model for CAs. And as we move forward with the categorization of our programs and services, you know, it does leave some uncertainty in terms of our future budget as an authority. We did quite fortunately go through a pretty substantial change to our planning and permitting fee schedules in July of 2022. And that was really to strive to meet our board target of a 50% cost recovery. So we were really missing the mark in terms of meeting that 50% cost recovery. So we really tried to increase our fees where it seemed feasible and reasonable, in kind of review and consultation with other conservation authorities and the fees that they're charging to try and achieve that 50%. So we've certainly seen improvements in the amount of revenue we're generating through fees. We're not quite meeting our targets just yet. The other piece is that with all this increased enforcement work, it takes an incredible amount of time and staff effort to address enforcement concerns. We can't just let things, as through the pictures that Steph's just showing you, we can't just let those things go. They need to be addressed. And so it does take a fair amount of staff time and resources away from our unit for which we don't generate any revenue. And then typically, unless landowners are willing to work with us on restoration, there's legal expenses that go along with those enforcement issues, again, which we don't collect revenue for. So those are some of the constraints we're under from a budgetary perspective.
So in terms of next steps, we do see some opportunities for both our unit to continue showing improvements as well as the organization as a whole. So with our unit, we really do want to focus on our staff and building our team. We do think we have seen great growth in the staff that we have retained over the last few years. And the responses to industry changes have been coming at us quite quickly. We've been trying to work together as a team to respond to those and persevere through those tough challenges and changes that we've been seeing come our way. We will continue to work with our municipal partners as well, and that will be our staff doing a service delivery, as well as just trying to communicate and keep those lines open between municipal staff and ourselves to help applications move forward and meet lines move as those changes come into effect on July 1st, especially through the planning process.
Again, I think we'll be working through a lot of policy changes and legislative changes over the next year and adapting and adjusting to that. We do see the public consultation process for our mapping updates as really helping ease our process, and having our mapping updates finally available to the public will be a real help to our planning and reg staff. We'll continue to evaluate our staffing and recruit new staff as needed, and continue to work on those training pieces to make sure our newer staff have the training they require, and ensure consistent messaging and decision-making across our unit. And at an authority level, we are exploring different technological advancements through our phone systems. I mentioned Teams earlier. We are trying to transition staff into the use of Teams. There is plans to abandon our current email system, which we've had in place for a very long time, and merge into Outlook, and improve our filing and technology through the use of better tools. So that's all we have for you today, and we're happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jenna and Stephanie. Are there questions from the board? You.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. If I go on the website, can I look up my property to see what maps are on?
Yeah, we have a public facing geo portal or mapping tool that anybody can use and look up their property. All you can see on that layer is our regulation limit. So it doesn't show you the actual flood elevation or the flood hazard versus the erosion hazard. It doesn't show you if it's a wetland that's impacting your property. It just shows you if your property is regulated or not, and if it is, the extent that it's regulated.
And just another quick question. The draft water course enclosement policy, are we talking about municipal drains?
Yes.
And no.
And no.
It's a mixture. The municipal drain is all covered under the Drainage Act. So we do work through that process for the municipal drainage side, whereas when it's not a municipal drain, it's how to deal with ensuring that if we do allow an enclosure to happen, the design considerations for how that water course or pipe system is now going to function and impact the environment around it. So it's we still have the Drainage Act to focus on the municipal drain side of things, and this is more focused on the non-municipal drain water courses.
Excellent. Further questions? Paul, please.
You mentioned that you're in the process of hiring more staff, and the chart showed 4 vacancies. Is it a matter of weeks till those will be filled, or is it going to take longer than that?
For some, so as I mentioned, the environmental engineer, we've been trying to recruit for that position for some time, and we are moving forward with interviews this week. So we'll hopefully be filling that position soon. Others, we've kind of paused. We are waiting on more legislative changes and our new Section 28 regulation. So some of it, we are kind of waiting to see what the changes mean in terms of workload and capacity needed for our unit. We are intending, we'll be posting the vacant planner 1 position, I believe this week. So that one will be filled. And yeah, we are planning to move forward with another regulations position this year. So we'll likely add to one of those vacancies within our unit. Haven't quite decided which one yet.
But building on kind of Paul's question though, wondering what your anticipated impact of the changes regarding the restriction on commenting on natural heritage issues in terms of staffing and workload. How are you seeing that play out?
Yeah, good question. So we are still providing natural heritage comments on those older applications, the ones that predate that January 1st implementation date of Regulation 596. So we are still relying on our ecologists to provide natural heritage comments on some older applications. In addition, our ecologist is also commenting to some extent when wetland features are involved. So they're considered a component of the hazard that we do regulate them. So we do anticipate that we will still need an ecologist to do some level of review in the context of hazards for us moving forward. But we are hearing some rumors that decision may be reversed, but if it doesn't, and we continue to stay out of natural heritage commenting, I guess we anticipate that role shifting into some other kind of program areas within the authority to support other units and programs within the authority. I don't know if Tracy wants to add anything.
But otherwise you don't see it impacting other
Technical staff?
technical staff and not so much, I'm not talking so much about the HR piece of it, I'm talking about the workload piece of it. Will it reduce your workload significantly?
So far, we haven't seen it.
Yeah.
Most of the time, the heritage features are related to that hazard component of a wetland or water coursers or erosion hazard. So with those connections of the natural environment, there is still a review for us to undertake. And at this point in time, our workload remains quite high. But we'll see how that pans out moving forward.
Okay.
And that's, I think, why Jenna said too, we're rushing to fill all of the vacancies, but plugging away at them one by one and reacting to those legislative changes that are forthcoming.
The second question was, a lot of organizations where they have files, there tends to be a gap if somebody's handling a file and they go off on vacation. And the person affected calls in and gets told, oh, I'm sorry, I can't answer your question. The person is on vacation. Have the changes that you've made been able to reduce that from happening for an applicant who may call in and want to know status of a application?
Yes, I would say yes, Sandy. That's what we've been striving to do for sure. Have our junior planners and our regulations assistant involved in the files that our regulations officers and our planner twos are working on. And at the same time, having those coordinator positions, I know the one filled, but from a planning perspective, Steph's quite involved in a number of the files that our planners are working on. So the idea is to have that overlap and knowledge built into existing staff so that if we not only lose someone permanently, but if they're on an extended vacation, that we have that internal knowledge to be able to answer questions or respond to inquiries while they're away.
Even,
Sorry.
I was just saying, even with the status update piece, the changes that we've made to filing, as well as our tracking spreadsheets for both planning and regulations, allow anyone in our unit to check in on something if we get a call about it. So status is right now the easiest thing for us to check up on. And then with the improved filing system, even finding that documentation that someone might be questioning where their EIS review is. Sorry for but all of that has been, we've seen improvements with the ability for us to have that information better and have a just a, what's the word I'm looking for, consistent system for all of our staff to be implementing and using.
And the last question, is there a viable way to have a public facing status report? So somebody from outside the organization could go to our website and get an idea of where an application is? So that, you know, they can self-serve as opposed to taking up staff time. I don't want to start a whole project that's going to cost a lot of money. It's hard to do and expensive, but there's a way to do that easily.
I think it's different for planning and regs. Like with planning, we have our municipalities who are leading that process, and most of their websites do include information on when the upcoming council meetings are, when the commenting deadlines and public consultation are happening for each file. But I think in terms of regs, because we are the drivers of that process, it is something that I'll let Jenna speak to.
Yeah, and it's not something we've considered yet, Sandy. Yeah, I think we've been just trying to make improvements internally in terms of tracking and status of files internally and making sure that information is available internally to all of our regulation staff, but not necessarily, we haven't necessarily considered making that public facing options for doing that yet.
Tracy?
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll just add on to what Jenna's comments were, is it's further complicated when we're dealing with so many different municipalities that may have their existing e-permit systems or cloud permits. I know a number of building officials in some areas of our watershed use that as a tool. And yeah, but it's that inconsistent approach that sometimes makes it a little bit more challenging for us to have something that everyone can use across the watershed.
Excellent. I have Jim, Anna, and then Tom, please.
Thank you, Jen, for the presentation. And I just want to put a comment out there, and it's really based upon what I've seen, and it's got nothing to do at your level, but the strengths, the weakness, the opportunities, the threats, I think they're all kind of combined. So you might have a strength as you're getting, say, 86%, all the files are being done on time and 86% are happy. I would think most of us sitting around the table, I know I can speak for myself on that. I might be only hearing from those 14%. And they're the ones that are taking up all the time. And you know what I mean? Because they're thinking that it wasn't quick enough or this didn't happen. So I just want to help you out a little bit on the strengths and weaknesses. I think there's a perception out there. And I think somehow if we can fix that perception, you know, I think that'd be positive all the way around.
Anna, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. Thanks, Janet, for the presentation. Really appreciated it. I think it's fair to say that to some extent, we're still waiting for the regs and changes coming from the province to move forward. We got a lot of that through your presentation. I do want to get back to mapping, though. Glad to see the flooding and hazard public participation conversation going forward this year. I do get feedback saying when's the mapping available. And I also heard you say it's important to us as well at the CA. So if you could take me through that process going through the PPM with the hazards and the flooding mapping, and how is this all going to come together, and what's the expectation of getting the mapping finally done?
Yeah, so I think we're going to be taking it out in stages. The first stage will be the mapping for the Thames, the entirety of the Thames across the watershed. So the modeling's been completed for that. We're currently in the process of peer review. So we'll go through a peer review process that will kind of happen over the spring and summer, and then we're anticipating starting to go out to the public in the fall. And we've got a lot of staff involved in it. So we've got our whole modeling team. that are kind of driving that process. And then we've got our communications staff, and Teresa's here. I don't know if you want to jump in, Teresa, but our communications staff will be leading some of that public effort. And then of course, our staff will be involved from a policy perspective on how that mapping gets interpreted, and how we make decisions based on it. So it's a huge effort. We've been meeting regularly to try and talk about the work plan and really get things rolling and meet our timelines, and make sure things are moving forward.
I'm glad to hear things are moving forward. It's important. I think looking forward to eventually coming in place. My last question is around, as you went through SWOT, what are the budgetary, did you get any a better understanding about budgetary restraints or what we can expect coming forward in our budget? Was that sort of looked at as well, or any surprises through?
At an organizational level, no. So really just kind of in the context of our unit, which, most of the programs and services that we deliver in our unit are considered Category 1 programs. So we're not anticipating huge amount of change in terms of our funding, and then our fees revenue, I guess, will remain to be seen. We're still kind of evaluating that, and how the legislative changes might impact how we collect fees and the amount of revenue we can generate through fees.
Thanks. Tom, and then Harsh, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I think that's a really great presentation. Definitely a lot of different moving targets. I was wondering if it's possible just to talk about a couple themes that seem to be coalescing. You mentioned that there is somewhat of a threat with relation to resources. It also seems that even though there is still changes in regulation, there's a firm direction towards quicker timelines and more responsiveness. I know in a lot of service, it's kind of that quality, time, and how's that go? Cost. Yeah. How are we looking to make sure that we're able to meet those timelines without sacrificing quality? Because I think that when we miss a timeline and there's a potential refund, there's a potential for an appeal, so that it can circumvent the regulatory processes in place. That's not good for the environment. That's not good for the bottom line. How are we making sure that we have the responsive capacity and can collect fees in a way that we can achieve those timelines in an environmentally and financially responsible way? I'm just wondering if there's more on the fee-for-service model or a study that would allow us to increase our talent and increase our resources and meet those timelines.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big question. And as Steph mentioned in one of her slides, like changes are happening faster than we can adapt to them right now. So we've been having you're talking about municipal refunds, so I'm assuming you're referring more to planning applications. We have been having a lot of communication with our municipalities about how their processes are changing in response to those Bill 109 changes and having to issue the refunds. And all of our municipalities are dealing with it slightly differently. So that's a challenge for us as well, right? But we've been really kind of trying to map out our process and provide realistic timelines for our staff based on our current capacity, and having those discussions, where it works and where it may not meet the mark, and how we may have to adjust our capacity to try and improve those timelines. But it's something we're kind of constantly evaluating, but we just can't keep up with.
I do think the growth too is helping meet those timelines better, and we'll continue to be able to track the information hopefully through especially the permit tracking that you guys get every month. And if you want more on planning, we can do that too. We do have a very similar spreadsheet that we've created, but I think you will see the continued improvements And I think that we will continue to work with our municipal partners to make sure that they're being addressed through planning as well as the permit side of things.
Excellent. Harsh, please.
Through the chair, thank you for the presentation. Very informative. Thanks. Just a couple questions. It's great to see you using technology, for advancement. Have we considered or are things already in place from security sides of it? Ransomwares are, a huge hit lately, spams and phishing, those type of attacks.
That is not my area of expertise. I don't know. Chris is in the room, whether you want to speak to that question at all, Chris.
Absolutely.
Chair, if I may respond to that. Yeah, that's always a concern. We take efforts to try and do our best to prevent those, but those challenges are always out there. Part of some of the changes that was mentioned in the presentation actually make improvements to our security to be able to prevent those type of attacks. But I take every opportunity to remind staff that, they are the challenge, and they have to be educated and be aware of the fact that these attacks are focused on individuals and trying to gain access by getting their credentials. So we take efforts to try and keep them educated and not clicking on those links as they come up.
Perfect, thanks. And just one quick one. I was just at the Bill 23 that we're losing some revenues with the application fees. Is there grants or some sort of compensation that the provincial government would be giving back regarding those lost revenues?
It wasn't seen in the budget that was just announced last Thursday. But it's more so the municipal side of things that will have to deal with that. We are a part in meeting those timelines, but at the end of the day, the municipality will proceed with their timelines and need to meet them in order to keep their revenue flowing. So it's the revenue from the Bill 23 stuff is more heavily related to the municipal budgets than our own.
Okay, thank you.
Dean, please.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks for the excellent presentation. I just wanted to respond to Tom's concerns about quality and of service and maintaining the cost. In my previous experience as a quality control manager in the construction sector, I think the key is your system and that you have in place for dealing with the applications as they come in. Like you mentioned about having templates on how to deal with what the procedure is to deal with the application and the different checklists and systems involved. So like it boils down to the training, what you mentioned in your presentation, and it boils down to the senior members of the team being able to transfer their experience and knowledge into that system and impart it on the junior members. So I understand what you're trying to do there, and I just wanted to point that out to Tom and everyone in the room, that it's an ongoing process, and every time the specs changed and the procedure changed. So yeah, you're always working on it, working on improving the system, but then dealing with the changes as they come in. So it's a challenge. So thank you.
Is there any further questions from the board? Well, thank you very much. That was very good questions. Obviously a great learning opportunity. So thank you very much. We look forward to more of those. I can tell even from an experienced side of the board, because things are changing so much, it's great to see that staff are putting that effort in to make sure they're responding. We might have a mover and a seconder that the board of directors receive the presentation for information, and as the mover and George as the seconder. Any discussion on that? I'll just provide a few comments. I think we're seeing staff gave great examples of how the constant change in the provincial policy has created barriers to improve development process. But I think they also give great examples of how they're recognizing the challenges, not only staffing changes in provincial policy and responding to those through increased training and responding through better policies. And really preparing for a new way of doing business. Because I don't think the development pressure is going away, especially with what we're seeing. There's certainly going to be challenges coming forward as we've seen with different policy. Hopefully, this will start to level out. Once we get to that point, we need some consistency to try to respond in a more long-term way. And I think I think it's also important to point out there, we saw some section 28 contraventions there that we have to deal with. Those are funded through taxpayers because there's no fees for that. So that's really an example of a provincial responsibility downloaded to municipalities that cost us extra on taxpayers. And then when we can't increase fees because of a fee raise, that again goes back to our member municipalities to be able to foot the bill for that. And these are all provincial directions without provincial funding. So that's certainly a challenge for our members to face. If there's not further discussion, I'll call for a vote on the motion. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We will now move to 5.1, approval of the minutes of the previous meeting, February 28th, 2023. Moved by Sandy, seconded by Mark. Any discussion on that? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. If there's any business rising from the minutes, is there any correspondence? Seeing none, excellent. We will now move on to report for consideration, number 6.1, wetland compensation position paper.
Sure, I'll just introduce that kind of furthers the presentation that Jenna was able to touch on. Comments about wetland compensation and one of those policy challenges. So certainly that provides a good overview and some context to the report that you have in front of you. Jenna is here, as well as the other authors that supported the report. Tara and Sarah are here as well to answer any questions that you may have regarding the paper.
Thank you very much. Okay, excellent. Questions of the report? Tom, please, and then Dean.
We had a question about how some of these things influence the Drainage Act, but I was just wondering, like, in an urban context, how wetland compensation policy would also work with stormwater management plans, because they can provide similar services, but definitely different ecological benefits.
Yeah, care to comment on the question?
I mean, certainly it's all integrated, and ideally, the point that we're hoping to get across with the wetland policy is that maintaining wetlands on the landscape is sort of the ideal situation. Because they do provide water management control in the landscape. Obviously, where wetland removal is happening, artificial stormwater will have to be integrated into the design plan. So it is something that between I don't know that this piece is specifically towards that, but it's definitely something we can provide some information on with it.
Thank you. Dean, please.
Thank you, Chair. I guess on this, I had, well, there's 4 questions actually. I'll go through them one by one.
Absolutely, please do.
So again, these questions, again, based on my experience in previous professional life, that's where I worked in construction. So you had the owner who was the province. I was a member of the contractor, and you had to respond to the owner's concerns. So the situations are similar. So I guess firstly, my first question was, what's the definition, or which definition of a wetland will be used surrounding this policy that's being proposed? So there's different, like in my research, like there's the Conservation Act, there's the provincial policy statement, there's the wetland evaluation system, and the Conservation Authority's own manual. So which the definition is going to be used?
Right, so through you, Chair. Yeah, the policy will speak to the definition within the Conservation Authorities Act, which is also consistent with the definition within our policy manual. So that's the definition of a wetland that we can regulate. So where it doesn't meet that definition, we don't regulate it. So we wouldn't have any authority to comment on the removal or compensation for that wetland if it wasn't a regulated wetland. So we rely solely on the Conservation Authorities Act definition.
Thank you. So the second question, will this proposed policy be applied only for the wetlands impacted by a provincial order, such as an MZO or whatever they're going to call it in the future? Or will this proposed policy be also applied to other cases where it's deemed that a wetland's impacted?
Yeah, so through you, Chair, it certainly will have to apply where an MZO is issued and we're required to issue the permit. But I think one of the things that Steph spoke to is that land availability piece and this pressure for development within the watershed and the number of sites that we're seeing that are constrained by hazards, including wetlands. So we're just seeing a real increase in the amount of pressure to remove or relocate wetlands. And it's such a difficult thing because we don't support the removal of wetlands. And so even having a policy in place is kind of contrary to our direction and our role in protecting wetlands. But what we're seeing is just so much pressure right now because of that land availability piece. So land and parcels of land that were constrained previously that went untouched because they were constrained are now being considered as great spots for development. So there just seems to be more and more pressure to develop those constrained pieces of land, and we need to be, we need to try and consider supporting the province's plan to build more homes faster. And so this is a piece we're getting pushed on a lot. And without any kind of guidance or direction that we can provide to people, we're getting a lot of pushback. And I mean, here in the City of London, the city has environmental management guidelines where they speak to wetland compensation at a 1-to-1 ratio. So we're looking for more than that. And without a policy piece or any kind of document that speaks to that, we're getting questioned a lot. Why would we agree to a 3-to-1 when the city's EMGs only speak to a 1-to-1? We only have to replace it 1-to-1. So this is where we really want to have something that if we are going to go to that last resort option and consider wetland removal, that we've got some real guidance pieces in place that we can say, okay, if we agree to this, here are our requirements. So that's really what this is intended for. But as a last resort option only, we really want other people to consider other options first. But because of how much pressure there is for development, we just feel we need to have this in place that we can lean back on if needed.
Thank you. So it's kind of, your answers are kind of leading into my other thoughts. So when there is a dispute or disagreement about the compensation, then typically there's a dispute resolution mechanism. Like you get to that last resort scenario and you're trying to hammer out the agreement, but the two sides can't agree on what that should look like. So does that go to a third party? Is that like?
Yep, so that's
all that, or?
Sorry, through you, Chair. That's where we have our hearings committee, and any kind of development proposal that's proposing removal of a wetland needs to come through the hearings committee anyways. Okay, so those types of projects are going to come through the hearings committee for a decision. And if there's disagreement about the terms of that removal, we'll have a policy in place that the board has approved that says if the hearings committee does agree to the removal of the wetland, here are the terms of that removal. And that's all spelled out in this policy piece that we want to create and put out there.
Thank you. So then leading into my supplementary questions on that thought, Mr. Chair, the results of the hearings committee would be binding to both parties, but then speaking to what assurance, like, okay, the hearing committee has made its decision. So how does that decisioning get verified and enforced in the field?
So through you, Chair, yeah, the proponent either agrees to the terms of the decision that the hearings committee has made, or they appeal that decision, and that appeal goes through the Ontario Lands Tribunal.
And then my next question was on the technical aspect. You mentioned London, City of London has a 1-to-1 compensation value, but how did our staff come up with the 3-to-1? Like, what was the rationale for the number 3?
Through you, Chair, I might suggest that our ecology staff speak to that. There's been a lot of review. There's a number of other conservation authorities that have policies in place, as well as other organizations. So there was a significant amount of review of other policies that are out there that went into the decision making. I'll let Sarah speak to that a bit more.
Sorry, just can we have staff that are in the back come forward just to make sure we get it on so we can hear, and also that it's get captured.
Here's the best place to. Right here?
Yep.
Sure. So there are many different scientific studies that have been done as far as compensation ratios for wetland replacement. There's no hard and fast solution. It's all very site specific, looking at the different functions that the wetlands in areas in southwestern Ontario where we do have sort of typically low forest cover, low wetland cover. The 3-to-1 ratio is kind of a standard that has been applied. But we do have in the draft policy that the 3-to-1 is sort of a minimum starting ratio. And then based on the site specific conditions, we would then look at what functions the wetland is providing, what sort of that greater landscape context is. And that's where we would have the scientific basis in order to have a smaller or larger context. So that's kind of a starting point, but it's not a guarantee fast.
It's, quote, to use an old term, it's the industry standard, so to speak.
Yeah, the industry standard is definitely having net gain. And since there is a level of certainty with these cycles, looking at that greater ratio is sort of the preference. Specific features is really.
Okay, thank you. And my last question, Mr. Chair, was the public consultation. I was concerned about making sure this, not only the stakeholders, but the public at large would be aware of the position paper being brought forward, just because there's a lot of it's tough to reach the public in the summertime to get the message across. And I know in Perth County, there's the official plan, there's a public consultation period there, so people may lose sight of the fact that there's a separate one for the Conservation Authority, or they might get it confused the two. So I just wondering what the Conservation Authority would do to notify not only the municipal stakeholders, but the public at large, so that they're aware. Thank you.
Excellent.
Yeah, through you, Chair. So we haven't given a ton of consideration yet to the consultation process. I think our next step is really to finalize the policy to be able to put it out to the public. I think we'll probably consult with other conservation authorities that have a policy in place to see what kind of consultation they did and consider what worked and what didn't work and apply it. So I know I provided kind of a guided timeline in the report for when we would complete consultation. But at this point, it's just a guide. We're also cognizant that we don't want to put too much we don't necessarily want to put too much effort into this, knowing there's other changes to come. So, and one of the proposals under Bill 23 was to have a provincial offsetting policy or compensation policy in place for natural heritage features, which would include wetlands. So we know it's something the province is considering. How soon that policy might be drafted and put out publicly is really unknown at this point, if it's going to move forward at all. But knowing kind of that's out there, and there could be that piece which we will be required to follow should that be released. How much effort do we want to invest in our own policy? But I guess without it, we are under a fair amount of pressure at the moment, and we are getting pushed on a lot of wetlands. And so we feel we have to do something and move forward with something at this point. But consultation is something we want to make sure we're being transparent about it. So whatever we do release, we want to make sure that it's available to the public, available to our stakeholders and our municipalities. So I'll have some more conversations with our communication staff and other conservation authorities that have been through this, as to what the best approach might be.
Okay, thank you.
Excellent. I have Sandy, Skylar, and then Paul and Debbie, please.
Through the chair, more of a comment in that I wouldn't get too hung up on the City of London's piece because it's relatively new. And it was really more of a settlement through the land tribunal process where they came up with the 1-to-1. They're also doing a comprehensive review for their official plan right now. And the environmental management guidelines are also fairly new, which were supposed to already be reviewed, but are on hold until all the provincial stuff is settled out. As well, my recollection is it was limited to any wetland of half a hectare or smaller would be eligible for relocation. And over the last 5 years, I'm aware of one. And frankly, whether or not that replaced the ecological functions is still quite a question mark. It was reviewed by Stantec fairly extensively, and the pre and post are very different situations. So it's an evolving science, I think, as Sarah said, and the jury is really out as to whether or not a wetland can actually be replaced in a similar feature and function. So, I understand the pressure that staff are getting. I understand that other conservation authorities have policies, so I commend staff for moving forward on developing a policy because we are going to get that pressure, and I think it's important that we do get moving on it, given the pressure. And I share Dean's concern about consultations through summer, but I think staff are cognizant of that. And it's going to take some time before we do have a policy coming back to this board. So looking forward to that. And we'll see how it works. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Skylar, please.
Thank you. And through the chair, mine also are a bit of comments about the 3-to-1 ratio. So thank you for asking that question. Yeah, I guess where I want to go with that was I'm hoping maybe in the position paper to see more clarity about maybe having a higher ratio if the wetland deserves it, because we do, when we're going through planning applications, I do know that we rely on the policy a lot. So I am worried if it is a 3-to-1 ratio, the applicant might point directly to that piece of policy and say, well, it's only 3-to-1, so I'm only going to do 3-to-1. So I would encourage staff when drafting it perhaps to explore how higher ratios can be included in the policy and be clear that if it's a PSW that or a wetland that deserves a higher ratio, that it will be receiving that, because I do worry that once it's written down, it's a 3-to-1 ratio that would be applied broadly to all applicants. So, but again, I echo Sandy's similar comments about how I don't even see that the replacement necessarily ever compensating, but I would love to see a higher ratio if that's something that can be explored. Just because industry standard is 3-to-1, I don't think that means that we have to settle for what is the average. So thanks for presenting this, staff.
Yeah, Jenna, your response to Dean's last question when you talked about province-wide, is Conservation Ontario working on this type of policy, or are they waiting to see what the province is going to come down as far as province-wide regulations and leaving it up to the individual conservation authorities at this point?
Yeah, through you, Chair, not that I'm aware of. And I don't know if you guys can confirm that at all, but no, I'm not aware of any policy that Conservation Ontario is developing. There certainly are a number of other conservation authorities that have policies in place, and I think others who are considering them like us have been relying on those documents in order to draft animal policies rather than a Conservation Ontario template.
And a follow-up to that, in the report, it does note different ones, and it also says that different conservation authorities have different pressures as far as development. They also have different levels of resources. Do you think a province-wide policy would be problematic, or is it better that each area has their own policy to deal with this? I know I'm asking for opinion.
I know, good point, I guess through you, Chair. I think it depends on what the provincial policy says. You know, hard to predict, and looks like Tracy wants to add.
I'll just add to that, given the policy direction we've seen, I believe it would be.
This one size fits all thing that.
And I believe it would be maybe not take into consideration the complexity, as such as Sandy has said, of it's not just put it over, move it and put it over here. It's whether it actually functions or not. And if we look at a simplistic view of we can just put it over there, then that's an issue. Tracy and then, Debbie's first. Yeah.
I was just going to add to that too, though, but we also have to look at the different areas of the province and where those stressors are. And so moving a wetland up north where there is an abundance of wetlands and that symbiotic relationship and that ability to build on natural systems is one factor, whereas down here relocating it, is there that symbiotic relationship anymore? Is there an opportunity to truly build those systems to ensure that functioning can occur? So you're really looking at very different landscapes and very, very different environmental conditions as a result. So that one size fits all would make it very challenging.
So sum up that makes it our adoption of a policy probably more important, so that we're out ahead of what the province wants. So when they do come with some type of a one size fits all, we can say, well, we've got this and it works. And that may put us at a bit of an advantage.
Debbie.
To the chair, I just wanted some further understanding of, and I think you've kind of answered it a little bit, Tracy. So in the event that a wetland ends up being paved over for whatever reason, it's recommended that it be replaced, obviously. That's the best scenario. But where is it? If it's supposed to be replaced within the same watershed, don't we already have all the wetlands within the conservation area already? So there's some outside the area that we could actually access to replace it with. I'm just not clear on that. Are you clear on what I'm asking?
Yeah. So I believe the question is, you're saying that are wetlands owned under conservation control already at this time?
Yeah, so how are you going to?
And how would they be integrated? Where would new ones be placed?
Oh, I mean, ideally in a very similar or close location to where it already exists. And so, I mean, ideally where we're more open to considering is where you're maybe shaving off a portion of a wetland on one side and replacing it on the other side. That's kind of the most ideal situation. What we don't want to see is kind of, you know, or shifting it from one area of a parcel to another.
That is still. Place it.
Well, no, you can't just pick it up and remove it. You have to basically recreate it somewhere else. Yeah.
Be a lot of work, whatever.
A lot of work. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Anna, please, and then Tom.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. I wasn't going to say anything, but you got me going with a couple of just comments.
If we could save, could we save just a bit of time, but just do the questions for staff, and then we'll have the comments during discussion phase.
Okay, so just questions right now?
Just questions right now.
So the question would be around the follow-up piece. Who is responsible for the follow-up? I know where it's mentioned in the recommendation that we need to do a better functioning feature. So how do we know that is going to be a better functioning feature? And starting off with, we're only going to do it if we need to do it. So just following through the process, and then who does the follow-up and the responsibility of the feature itself?
Yeah, good question. And I'll maybe defer to our ecology staff for that.
Mr. Chair, so there are many factors for these types of projects. So the first thing we would need to do is to do sort of the baseline work to define the extent of the existing wetland, to determine what ecological and hydrological functions it is providing. Sorry. So we would do a lot of those studies with the consultants who are retained by the developers or the landowners or whoever we're working with on the project. So all of that information can be gathered, and then that will help to inform the location of any potential compensation that would happen. And again, we'd be looking at the types of soils that are present, where the groundwater is in that area to determine if a wetland relocation would be successful. So depending on whether we're sort of working through the planning process or a regulations permit process, there would be conditions attached to any sort of approval for this type of process. And those would include any sort of monitoring during the development process as well as post-construction. So again, those are things that the science is sort of still working on what those monitoring periods would look like, but we would have specific details noted in the conditions of approval as to when the monitoring would need to take place, how frequent that would need to happen, what variables we'd be looking at, and who would be responsible for doing that.
Thank you. Tom.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just kind of following on Councillor Heffernan's and Councillor Hopkins' comments about how is this actually practical? And I think from like a planning perspective, how are we looking at this? Does it have to be the same parcel? Is it have to be owned? Is it something where it can be rented? Are we looking at some sort of land trust? Like, how are we making sure that through zoning, we're ensuring that this actually is carried out and enforced? And what kind of mechanisms would be utilized for that process? Because if we say it's the same parcel, yeah, you can't take it the next concession over, and obviously there's not the same drainage benefit at that point.
I think that's a bit of a twofold question. In terms of zoning, we do make sure that when a feature perhaps isn't zoned, most common zone for a wetland would be an open space zone or a natural environment zone, depending on which municipality you're located in. So we would ensure that whatever that feature is right now either gets zoned, or if you're looking to relocate it, the relocated feature would also be zoned to ensure the long-term protection. That zone would also typically be asked that it encompasses the buffer of the feature as well, to help ensure that future development doesn't encroach into the buffer. And that buffer is typically set depending on the type of use that is proposed adjacent. But in relation to the question, the process isn't clear right now, and kind of goes back to Paul's original question on an opinion, is provincial direction to help provide an improvement in the process to be able to make sure that it works would be beneficial for all municipalities and conservation authorities together to ensure that there is that long-term ability for the wetland to succeed in that location. But there'd be environmental impact studies, hydrogeological assessments, and geotechnical assessments to understand what's going on under the ground and how that feature can be recreated in that area and if it would succeed. So before we would even allow them to consider it, the onus is on the applicant to prove that that relocated location is actually able to support the needs of that wetland feature that's being created. And in some of the ones that we've worked with already, there's different types of wetlands. And the cost of replicating different wetland types is drastically different. So we worked with one in particular, Brent and I, where there was a city project, and they looked at compensation, and the city took the cost. They got the money to redo the work for the applicant, but there was a long list of criteria that they needed to meet to be able to get to that point.
In some ways, a defined benefit that has to be replaced.
Pardon?
In some ways, it's a defined benefit.
Yeah, it needs to be really clearly laid out, everything that gets that consideration.
So, any further questions? Seeing none. We will now ask for a mover of the recommendation. The recommendation is that staff be directed to move forward with the recommendations outlined in this report to draft a wetland compensation policy. And that this position paper and draft policy be shared with the public and stakeholder groups within the UTRCA watershed for consultation and feedback. We have a mover for that. Tom's moving, all seconding. Discussion. I'll just, my comments is that I think this needs to move forward. Again, we have seen other conservation authorities have these for quite some time. We think the province will make direction on this, but we certainly have to move forward with the understanding that they may not as well. And so we need to be prepared. I certainly don't want to see staff go through all the trouble and have the province go in a different direction, but I think this will be a good exercise as well, is understanding the scenario and the situation that we're under and the stressors and the constraints of such a policy. I know we focused a lot on the actual moving of wetlands and that sort of thing, but this is a last step in a process to try to save wetlands. Obviously, we don't want to have any wetlands disturbed because we can't recreate them, and it's just nature does things way better than we can. Let's face it, they've been doing it. It's evolution of a billion years to get to where we are in wetlands, and they do a wonderful job. And so the best thing is just let them do that. I think that the 3-to-1 policy, one of the biggest deterrents is making this as challenging as possible to try to have happen and access. Through a 3-to-1 at least minimum, it creates a deterrent. We've heard all the studies that'll have to happen, the cost of implementing this. The best thing we want to do is have developers go, this is not worth doing, and let's have development in an area that doesn't require this. So I certainly support not having an easy process and recognizing the responsibilities of maintaining those wetlands if we can. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We will now go to 6.2, interim vaccination policy.
I just wanted to actually take this opportunity to introduce the board to our new HR coordinator, Justin Henry. If Justin can stand up.
Great.
This will be the first meeting that Justin's attended, and he started with us back in December. I think some of you have picked up on the fact that Sharon's name isn't on this report. Sharon has decided to retire after 42 plus years with us as an organization. However, she is continuing to work part-time for us until the end of April. So we're hoping to have her here in April so everyone can say a fond farewell and wish her all the best in her retirement, because she has lots of organizational knowledge to transfer to Justin in this transition period. But we wish her all the best. Lots of activities and cruises planned, as I understand. Anyway, just thought this policy had been brought to the board, and we had been discussing it back in the fall, just as the Omicron variant was starting to emerge. And through discussion and advice from legal counsel again was just to kind of put a pause on doing a reevaluation and come back in the new year with the consideration of when we should suspend the policy. So providing that, certainly Justin is here as well as Jennifer to speak to the report and ask any questions. Yeah.
Move the recommendations.
Excellent. I'll just ask if there's any questions first of the report. Seeing none, I'll set Sandy's moving of the recommendations, seconded by Tom. Any discussion? Paul, please.
I'm very happy to see this come forward. I did second the motion from Tony Jackson and speak in favor of it last summer. The former board didn't agree with the motion and decided to keep the policy in place. When this policy was brought in, there was tremendous political pressure on all employers to impose these type of vaccination mandates. The situation has changed certainly since it was imposed and certainly since last summer. So the part of the recommendation I'm also quite in favor of is that in the future, this be made as part of the operational decision and not come to the board. That this is definitely at this station point in time, it's going forward, it's a health and safety issue, and it should be something that management decides whether to go forward with or not. So I'm fully in support of the motion.
Any further discussion? Yes, I guess there's certainly a different situation than we were in before, and gladly so. So support that. All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Moving down to 6.3 Provincial Offences Act designation. Tracy, please.
Sure. As previous board members have seen, we do bring Provincial Offences Act officer designations to the board from time to time, but we're often wearing a couple of different hats. We do have enforcement of Section 28, our regulations, as Jenna was speaking about this morning, but we also have enforcement of Section 29, which is dealing with our land trespass to property act. So in this case, the two appointments today for Jay Ebel and Richard Brewer are for that Section 29 component. But I just wanted everyone to be aware that you will be seeing a couple different types of designations in staff over time. So certainly we are expecting some changes to regulation in both of these categories. In the past, each individual conservation authority had their own regulation with regard to Section 28 and a regulation under Section 29. But in future, the province has already made some changes with regard to Section 29 as drafting, and there's a new regulation for all conservation authorities to fall under one regulation. So a reduction from the 36 individual conservation authorities down to one, and we're anticipating that with Section 28 as well. In the case of Section 29, the regulation isn't yet proclaimed, but again, we anticipate all the regulations will be updated and proclaimed at the same time. So I'm going to pass it over to Brandon at the back of the room there to make introductions of staff.
So I'll just, through you, Chair, I'll just introduce Jay Ebel with our lands division. So Jay started here in 2003, went to the branch for 4 years, back with the authority here at the Forestry division, and recently moved here to the lands division as land management technician. So very happy to have Jay doing the lands division. Still with the forestry. And Richard Brewer as well. Richard Brewer has been here since 2013 in various roles within the lands division, as well as fleet and facilities and Fanshawe conservation area as well. So Richard is land management technician as well, works in our environmentally significant areas unit, the ESA unit that manages the 12 ESAs in the city of London. So just want to congratulate both Jay and Richard on completing the level 1 Conservation Ontario compliance training, and welcome them to the Provincial Offences Act officer team.
Excellent. Now we have to do our part to make it official, but any questions? Sandy, please.
I always appreciate the opportunity to meet staff taking on these new roles, but curious to know, is it something the board is required to approve? Okay, thank you. I'll move the
Yes, I will
recommendation.
verbalize that.
Any further questions? And I'll accept Sandy's recommendation. The recommendation is that the board of directors designate Jay Ebel and Richard Brewer as provincial offenses officers for the purpose of enforcing the Trespass to Property Act, the Conservation Authority regulations on Upper Thames River Conservation Authority UTRCA property as a requirement of the position of lands management technician. And then second that discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed, that is carried. Congratulations. And we will now move to item 6.4, Board of Directors meeting schedule revision. Tracy, would you like to introduce that, please?
Sure. Thank you through the chair. Just highlighting that there's been a change. One is just to highlight in May that our meeting will be followed by a bus tour, and that will end approximately 3 o'clock. We're still working out the full details, but wanted everyone to be aware that we'd love to have you in person and on the tour. Make sure that's in your calendars, and recognizing that we're trying to keep you longer than your normal scheduled time. The second change is due to a conflict on my part. There's a GM's meeting that Conservation Ontario is hosting over a couple of days, the Tuesday and Wednesday. So of the 27th and 28th. So with being away, I was hoping we could move the week ahead. I think a lot of people are We're trying to get off on vacation at the end of June and start their holidays, as we don't have a meeting in July. And I anticipate we'll probably still have lots to cover in June, with perhaps some regulatory changes that come into effect July 1st. That's my concern anyway. We'll see if that comes to fruition. So just a few things that I'm hoping to change for approval on, so that we can have the calendars updated accordingly.
Questions to the report? Being none, can I have a move of the recommendation? You, and seconded by Scotty. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Next, we'll go to 6.5, Finance and Audit Committee, open position.
Yes, just raising this after our AGM concluded and having some discussion, it became apparent that there's some interest by Harj in the Finance and Audit Committee, and there still is an open position there. So I think we've done this in the past. It was an easy report to bring up because of the same situation had arisen in the past. So certainly wanted to bring it back to the board to consider reopening that position on the Finance and Audit Committee.
Questions? Would someone like to make a motion to move the motion to reopen the vacant position? Paul and Hugh, his seconder. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. So now we can go through the process. Is there a nomination for someone to sit on the committee?
I nominate Harj.
Excellent. There's seconder. Or sorry, we will not need a seconder. We'll just need a nominator. Is there further nominations? Seeing none, we'll follow the rules. I'll call again. Seeing none a third time. I'll declare nominations closed. Harj, are you willing to accept the position?
Yes, through the chair, I can accept the position. Thank you.
Excellent. With that, I will declare that Harj is now a member of the Finance and Audit Committee. Excellent. With that, I will ask for a motion to take a short break before we go into closed session. Moved by Tom, second by Hugh. Live stream, perfect. I can report that the board did receive information and closed. That it was just information. There was no decision made. So we will now move forward with reports for information, and that is 8.1 Administration Enforcement Section 28 Status Report. Tracy, if you'd like to give an introduction to that.
Yeah, no, I'll just pass it over to Jenna. You've heard lots about Section 28. This is the monthly report. And I know that she's got some plans to be updating a little bit more detail to be provided next month. Jenna, if you want to add to that.
Through you, Chair. Yeah, this is what our standard monthly report looks like. That speaks to the permits that were issued in the previous month. This one includes both months of January and February. Since at the AGM, we presented the annual report for all of the permits that were issued in 2022. So this one speaks to those permits that were issued in January and February of this year. And then the report itself provides a bit of a summary and some information about where we're at this point in terms of the number of applications we've received versus how many we've submitted. And I know there's been some requests, and Sandy inquired again about including more information about permit applications that have been submitted that we haven't issued yet and where they may be delayed, and including some more information about delayed permits and the reasons in this report. So we'll be looking to add that information into April's report.
Questions of the report? Andy.
Just one question, I think I've asked this previously, is when will staff have turned down an application for Section 28, it comes to the hearings committee if there's an appeal. But I take it on that basis, there aren't a lot of applications that do get turned down. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'll look to Jenna for some current numbers. I know my time in the role, it was quite rare. Usually maybe one a year, a couple a year.
Yeah, and again, I mean, we really try and work with applicants to get their application into a place where we can approve it. So if initially what they're proposing isn't something we can permit, we work with them to try and get it into a position where it is something we can permit. And, you know, explain what the constraints are in terms of the hazards, and what we'd be looking to see if they were to make some adjustments to their plans and how we could ultimately approve it. Where they're not willing to accept it and they, you know, that's where staff will start to outline the process for taking it through the hearings committee. We have increased our hearings fee, which I think has acted as a bit of a deterrent recently. There's been a number of people inquiring about hearings. I would say in the last few months, we've had maybe 5 or 6 people inquiring about a hearing, and staff outline the process, what's involved, and here's what the fee is, and then we haven't heard anything. So our hearings fee previously was $200, which there's a lot of work that goes into preparing for a hearing. So it's our regulations staff that take it to the hearings committee, but there's a lot of preparation on their part to prepare the report. We have to convene the hearings committee. We have to make sure there's a lot of Michelle's time that goes into coordinating it and facilitating it and getting all of the members here and arranging for the hearing. So we felt that $200 was just totally insufficient to meet how much staff time and workload went into it. So we have created some categories of hearings and increased the fees for that. So I don't, and I know other conservation authorities were intentionally doing that to try and show applicants how much work is involved in bringing it to a hearing and to try and deter the number of people that were requesting hearings.
So, Mr. Chair, I'm sure we'll be interested as a board to see how many of the applications are not meeting the timelines. My assumption is they're probably complex applications. But I think it kind of goes back to what Jim had said earlier in communicating, is that there might be an impression that we turn down a lot because some applicants don't even apply because they're hearing, well, the Upper Thames doesn't approve things, but we do. So maybe there's some planning staff in some of the municipalities or in other places where we can point out that we actually do move things fairly quickly. We meet our timelines, particularly for minor applications, and that we are an approval authority, not a disapproval authority. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Excellent. Mark.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if somebody asks us for opinion on something, or why is this being delayed? What's our best direction as board members, Jennifer, response to them to pass it along to you?
Yeah, through you, Chair, I would pass it on to staff, particularly if you are on the hearings committee, because you're potentially creating a conflict of interest if you start wading into it yourself, or sometimes people don't necessarily want a hearing, but they may want to come and speak in front of the board, and you don't want to get too involved in the details and you want to remain impartial. So if it does get to that point, so I would say your best direction is to refer it to staff, and if those requests as they come through our board members, we try and get back to you as quickly as possible to say that we've contacted the person and that this is our direction.
Specifically yourself though, Jenna, so you can pass it along to the person who's got the file.
I'm gonna go to Peter and then Anna, please. Peter, do you have a question?
No, my apologies, Chair. It's a legacy hand. I'll take it down if I can.
Thank you. Anna, please.
Yeah, I think my answer's being covered. I wanted to know who the staff person would be. Would it be Jenna or Tracy? But Jenna answered the question.
Excellent. Any further questions? Seeing none. Can I have a mover of the recommendation, or just to receive the report? Dean, seconded by George. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We will now move on to inventory of programs and services report number 4, Tracy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. The report covers our fourth progress report to the province. It is due at the end of this month. Getting it together now. I did notice I made one error. My rough to get it prepared and for the board. And I've updated the table. Emily's going to bring it up on screen. Because one of the things that this report differs from, and I've mentioned it in the past, is that we've been transferring over to Questica with our new tool. So some of those reports that we get out, it's a brand new report for it. I know Christine, she worked quite closely with Questica in order to be able to produce this type of report. Because as I've said before, we really haven't thought through our programs and services in this manner before, kind of piecing out what's mandatory, what's non-mandatory, what category of programs and services, when really, when we're talking about many of our programs, there's so much integration, staff time that work in different program areas. So through this, I instead provided a summary table to really reflect the program type and where those funding sources are coming from. So kind of piece this out a little bit more. And this will be updated in the report for submission to the province, but really looking at the 3 categories of programs and where those funding sources come from. So when we're looking at category 1 right now, you know, the transfer payment from the province for section 39 is 1.6%. And then we utilize about 64% of municipal levy sources. And, you know, included those estimated costs as well. Recognizing, you know, the funding sources and the revenues generated don't always end up with the true cost of the programs, because we have used some deferred amounts in the past couple of years as well. But category 2 programs, you know, most of that is captured under municipal agreements and a little bit under municipal levy, where those agreements are also dealing with lands, which is part of our land management activities as well. But category 3, I found quite interesting as well, looking at the amounts that we are able to generate through different contract proposals and different partnerships that we're involved with, and only applying 10% of municipal levy to those amounts. So certainly wanted to highlight that you know, this is the current distribution and contributions of how we apply our levy. But we'll be looking at through our agreements and moving forward from 2024 and beyond, how that levy distribution should be applied.
So questions of the report? Paul, please.
Very quick comment and then a question. And that, my comment was, of all the information, that's what I appreciated the most. And I appreciate now that it's even updated, I appreciate more. But the breakdown of how these 3 different categories are going to be funded has been the question we've been asking ourselves since this all came out. So I very much appreciate you including that in there, Tracy. My question, and I've asked this before, and I'm not sure whether the answer was fuzzy or my memory is fuzzy, but Oxford County is a unique setup within this watershed. And 0.5 in the inventory principles was that you were going to be entering in municipal agreement negotiations before the end of this year. In Oxford County, are those negotiations going to be at the county level, the lower tier level, or a combination of the 2?
Through the chair, depending on what categories of services are asked for. For category 3 programs, it's anticipated that will come from the county because it's broader county-wide. But if there's a specific category 2 program that is very distinct to the participating municipality within Oxford County, there may be an agreement at that level with the participating municipalities like Zora, for example. But as we're being able to better piece this apart, the big question has been, well, how is this going to breakdown going to occur, and what happens where? That's the information that I want to have in order to go out and have those further discussions. I've certainly had initial discussions with your CAO, Dawn, at the municipality, and asked if there's any concerns, and nope, everything seems to be going good and they like the approach. And I think this is again, formalizing and having that transparency piece of who does what, who's responsible for what. And it'll come right down to, is that something that the county's covering off for all of its participating municipalities, or there's some specific one-off cases where those participating municipalities within Oxford County want maybe a little bit more or something different that addresses their needs too.
Follow up. So how soon would you expect that you would be talking to, you've had initial discussions with CAOs. When are you going to get in the nitty gritty?
Through the chair, I could tell you for Oxford County, we've got some dates up there right now for the county discussions. Just waiting to hear back to confirm, because on top of myself having those discussions, as general managers with the CAs that have shared municipalities, we're trying to go and have those conversations at the same time. So Samantha Lawson, who's the general manager at the Grand, her and I have been trying to line up the times to go to Oxford County as an example. So
Work in progress.
work in progress and schedules as permitted. Have a new CAO now too at the county level. So yeah.
Something to do. Sandy.
Mr. Chair, I was just crunching some numbers just off the top of my head more than anything else is. So roughly $800,000 of category 3 is out of municipal levy that we will not be able to levy. But there's a number of the 14% that's self-generated for category 1. Based on my understanding, could be levy, which is about 1.5 million. So I recognize that this is a moving target, but I want to let the municipalities know that this may not lower your levy, this may raise your levy based on the current numbers. How that's going to play out for each individual municipality, I have no idea, obviously. But this may be an unintended consequence of the provincial changes. Am I kind of eyeballing these numbers sort of correctly at this point?
Yes, through the chair, that's correct. And I just maybe make that one clarification. Category 3 isn't something that we're not able to levy for, but it's certainly something that we can have cost apportionment agreements with their municipalities. So just adding that clarification, but certainly those are the types of concerns, these unintended consequences that could happen.
And we're already through the first quarter. We've got to build a budget for 2024 at some point for this board to review. So hopefully there's an understanding at the provincial level of the complexity of this. And if they're going to make changes, they better hurry up and make the changes. Otherwise, we're going to be scrambling, I think, in November when we see the draft budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Further questions? Hugh.
Yeah, it's on page 6 there. There's a bunch of new programs, but they're mostly on our land and the use of our land. And then they came into category 1. And just why would they be in category 1 considering it's our land that we own ourselves?
Through the chair, category 1 programs and services, it is recognized in the mandatory program regulation that any lands that are used for passive recreational use are providing that broader benefit to the public and certainly to the province being able to support more passive recreation. So we have split out those lands that we have that passive use, and we have to continue to manage even for risk and liability and slips and falls, those same comments you were just mentioning, Hugh. And then we've separated out category 3 is the actual campground operations. So that's been a distinct separation there.
That's fine.
Further questions? Seeing none, I'll ask for a motion to accept the amended report. The current information, Tom, George, discussion. All I'll say is that, yeah, it's that is a great info graphic up there. Biggest thing we can do from a board level is talk to our member municipalities about the importance of getting to the table when the Conservation Authority calls to set up those memorandums of understanding. I know there's going to be budget pressures from all municipalities. I know Oxford County, it starts in July. So it's just not, here's a budget. That process starts very early. And again, if we don't have all the information and they're willing to sit down at the table and make sure those agreements are in place, it's going to delay. And hopefully we'd rather wrap this up on time rather than have to ask for an extension. So that's where we can play an advocacy role with our members to make sure that if there's any barriers, we can try to make sure they have that information. And the great information up there is see the value that's provided by those category 3 programs. 10% funding. It's always been a great value of municipal levy of 40% and 60% other funding. But really in those, it's extremely highlighted of 10% funding for 85% self-generated. That's huge. That's 90% funding not coming, and we in our watershed get to benefit from those programs. So that's huge. Any further discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. We will now move on to the annual health and safety report.
Thank you, through the chair. We have Jennifer Howley here today, and she's bringing forward our annual health and safety update. Certainly able to provide a bit of an overview and highlight some of the accomplishments and achievements that we've had this year. Particularly, it jumped out at me as having the numbers of training opportunities that have been provided by staff, which I think has been great. And Emily, I believe there's a slide to share as well that Jennifer might want to talk to. Come forward.
Yeah, this wasn't included in your package. However, it will be distributed to staff later on. I really think it's important for the staff to see this demonstrates the internal responsibility system in the sense that everybody has a role in health and safety, whether it be, bringing reports to the board and having you discuss them, the training opportunities, the requirement to report first aid reports. And then down in the corner, there's a section called TIDE, and that's our team for inclusive diversity and equity. And that's an internal team. And again, I think that's part of the health and safety program, and staff and yourself need to be aware. Just thank you.
Is there any questions to the report for staff? Andy?
Just a quick compliment to Jennifer, her staff and the I team, as well as the health and safety committee. It's really a pleasure as a board member to see the good work that's done and the low incidences. I think is a compliment to our staff.
Further questions? Seeing none, can I have a motion to receive the report? Paul and Debbie second. Discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? That is carried. Section 8.4 is for your information report. Make sure you click on the link and enjoy all that. It's important that this new program that the UTRCA is using really benefits the user experience. It's not just a piece of paper anymore. It is a completely interactive process, which allows staff to really highlight way more things than the great things that the authority does. So big fan of that. And again, if you haven't signed up, make sure you sign up. It's the first thing that pops up when you click on it, so that's good. And then we'll move down to 8.
And send the link to your colleagues too on council.
Absolutely, that's a good point. 8.5 building overview presentation. Oh wait, that's our tour.
We're getting a short presentation initially. Mike is going to provide it.
Excellent.
The tour will be after we conclude.
You look really hard, you can see us.
Better eyes, not good.
Would you like the mouse or do you want me?
Go ahead.
Or.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Board of Director members and staff. My name is Michael Knox and I am the Properties Superintendent here at the Conservation Authority. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you today. The purpose of this presentation is to provide a brief introduction into the Watershed Conservation Center, the main administration office for the Upper Thames River Conservation Authority. This presentation will be complemented with a tour of the building where we can discuss a few of the finer designs, concepts, and or ideas that you are about to see. I would like you to take note of the vision statement in the bottom left corner. Inspiring a healthy environment. Please remember this, as I will circle back to this towards the end of the presentation. Where we were. Where are we going? As you can see, we had several areas where inadequacies existed. Where there was the closet for an IT room, or that the IT room was underneath the upstairs washrooms. To permanent portables, to one meeting room. The previous administration office was not functioning in terms of both condition and performance. And so the concepts of a new building started in the early 2000s. And prior to the official opening in 2013, an exhaustive needs assessment was completed and included many specialized functions to deliver this asset in an effective and efficient manner. The building was designed by architect Randy Wilson. Graceview Enterprises was the contractor which worked on the building, on the project. Special attention must be given to the 2007 UTRCA Board of Directors and their respective municipalities. These board members were pivotal in allowing the building to proceed concept to completion. More details and information can be found just outside this room on the accent wall. You'll see here 36,000 square feet and bottom bullet, LEED Platinum certification. So LEED, what is it? Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design is a green building rating system and certification. It is a widely used standard that recognizes buildings that are efficient, cost-effective, and better for occupants in the environment. There are different levels of certification, and it is based off of preconditions and a point system. The points are based off of specific components and include, as you can see, sustainable sites, water efficiency, energy and atmosphere, materials and resources, indoor environmental quality, and innovation in design. So the next few slides, I will let you review some of the bullet points, some of the specific physical designs and concepts. But again, we will see these on our tour and we can explain in detail their efficiency. If you look at the green percentage, that is what we are achieving. And black is basically the recommended level. Again, indoor environment, these are some of the conditions that exist or some of the designs. Construction, notice the construction of the air quality during construction and before occupancy for efficiency. Thermal monitoring and comfort. Low emitting adhesives and sealants, paints, coatings, carpets. Yes, when you open a bag of chips in this building, everyone smells it. And of course, the daylight is available to 80% of the spaces, and you'll see that on the tour. Energy and atmosphere. This is kind of a very mechanical one. It is an air-to-air heat exchange system. You will see the earth tube the first picture, you will see the solar wall panels down in the lower picture with the blue panels on the side of the building. That will be explained. It is a heat recovery system for hot water. We have yet to use our hot water tank. So here's an example. Lots of numbers, lots of data. Top right, you see the outside air temperature taken on March 21st. 11 degrees. Left side, middle of the screen, solar wall temperature, 27.5. So it was a sunny day. Just below that, below the large OA, outdoor air, earth tube temperature, 8.5. So in regards, what does all that mean? What are all those numbers? With that magic circle in the middle, which is our magic recovery wheel, you can see that we are sending a temperature of 20 degrees to the building, to the workspace. Before I came in today at 11 o'clock, I'll give you some numbers. The outside temperature was 2 degrees. The solar wall temperature was rising at 18. The earth tube was at 12. And we are supplying air leaving the makeup wheel 21 degrees. Just for, in regards, our set point for the building is 23. So that just puts it into perspective. And sustainable sites and innovation and design. This building has moved from initialization and design to the operation and maintenance phase of its life cycle. This is a brilliant, modern, green building. It is complex. By implementing ideas and concepts found within asset management, we have started to build a framework that takes on an integrated approach where we can effectively manage this asset, delivering service to all stakeholders involved. This is accomplished through constant monitoring, inspecting, documentation, and analysis. It involves maintenance, repair, replacement, or refurbishment as required. It is a multi-tier framework that involves many different working parts to be successful. Now, let's go back to our vision statement, which was.
Sorry, I was looking.
Inspiring a healthy environment. Our role now is not only operation and maintenance, risk, performance reviews based on the envelope, but it also acknowledges a cultural significance to the relationship with its employees. This building inspires a healthy environment. Our staff inspire a healthy environment. This form of symbiotic relationship that is created fuels the objective to produce value to our stakeholders. It is about how efficient the building is, how hot or how cold, how dark, how light, how many days we're in or out of the office. But it's also about letting our staff know that when they walk through the door, that the environment that they are working in is inspiring and is healthy. With this combined focus to both the tangible and intangible subjects, we can create a positive workplace culture. Recent studies have found that green buildings can have a positive impact to the user experience passively on the topics discussed through this presentation. In closing, I'd like to thank you for allowing me to, as a representative from all our staff, to give a glimpse into the workings of the Watershed Conservation
Center. And I look forward to discussing any questions you may have during our tour later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we will hold all questions to our tour. Maybe they'll be explained during the tour. Board now. We will now move down to item number 9, notices of motion. Are there any notices of motion from board members? Seeing none, go to the chair's comments. First comment is, I want to really thank all the board members today for amazing participation and questions. That's what we're here for, is to discuss policy. And so I really appreciate you partaking in that and making sure that we fulfill our obligation and give staff great direction. Also, I want to let everybody know that Tracy and I will be attending the Conservation Ontario AGM, which is in person in Toronto on April 3rd. And so we'll be traveling down there. The rest of the meetings are in virtual, 4 meetings this year. So we'll make sure we bring back a report on that and let the board know how that works out. And with that, are there any members' comments?
Just an ask. When we get our agenda, if it's possible that on the right-hand side of the agenda, you can put the page numbers where everything is, and the pages, if they could be sequenced. Like if you're looking for something, it just makes it easier to find. That's all. Really appreciate it.
No problem.
Any further member comments? Dean.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to give a commendation and congratulations to the Upper Thames Conservation Authority staff who were involved with the recent landowners workshop that was held in West Perth on March the 23rd. I had the pleasure to read everybody at that session. So we had Rick Kootstra from Clinton give a slide presentation on his farming operation, how he's adopted conservation tillage practices and established a wetland on his farming operation. Rob Davies from Upper Thames gave an excellent presentation on tree planting, the various details on tree planting. And the other presentations were members from Oswald Bayfield and Maitland Valley Conservation Authority. So just a hearty congratulations to all involved, and job well done. Thank you.
Further comments? And then we'll move down to general manager comments.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you to Dean because for providing those introduction comments. We actually hosted 2 rural landowner workshops, one in Mitchell, that's Perth mentioned, but another one in Ilderton. And from what I understand, it was a great turnout, over 60 participants at each, and already some questions about when the next one's going to be. So staff are planning to have a more Oxford County focused rural landowner workshop planned for the fall. So I think it's a great opportunity to get out, and not just talk about tree planting, but all things rural, whether it be stewardship program or cover crops, any soil crop improvement projects, and a great opportunity to bring local speakers in to share their experience. And the only other thing I think we mentioned a few times today is constant changes expected from the province. And we're fairly certain we're going to see some new regulations in the very, very soon future. So the guess right now is expected right before the Easter weekend with very, very quick timelines and implementation. So Jenna alluded to it already, but lots of additional change and new policies expected as a result. So I'm anticipating a busy spring and into summer.
If you want to make sure I make a habit of checking every Friday on the ERO website. That's where they'll be posted. And so they'll be, that's where we'll get the news from. Tom.
Are there any budget highlights? Is their absence being its own highlight?
I think that would be a good summary statement. Yes.
Federal budget is being released today as well. So hopefully that's where we do get a lot of our auxiliary funding from. So I'm sure staff will be paying close attention to that.
Yes, and through the chair with that comment, just to build on That's what we have seen more recently is more federal funding available for climate change initiatives, and many of our existing programs and services fit very well into those eligibility requirements. So we'll be on the lookout for those.
Seeing no other hands, I will call for adjournment. Thank you very much. We're adjourned.